So I just want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we live on here in Australia. That's the Gubbi Gubbi tribe, or the Cubbi Cubbies tribe here in the Sunshine Coast. Just want to acknowledge the elders past, present and future. And for tonight's event, East Meets West, the conservation efforts in the UAE by Rebekka Pentti, if I'm pronouncing that last name correctly. So thank you all for joining tonight. There's just a couple things that I'll run through before we jump into the actual talk. So let's get into it. So in case you didn't know who we are, Reef Checker Australia is a non-profit organisation. We are based all around the world in over 90 countries, but we believe in protecting the reefs and oceans by using citizen science. So we go out and do hands-on research, doing surveys, like the diver here on the right, and we match that with hosting events in the community as well. A little bit of Zoom etiquette, just for everybody here. Sorry, if somebody has that, wonderful. Just like that, if everybody could mute their mics and keep their video cameras off, just so we have a strong connection. So Zoom runs completely smoothing. If you want to be on our mailing list, the email is just there, secevents@reefcheckeraustralia.org. We send out a monthly email with all the events, updates, and everything going on in the Reef Check world as well. I just want to let everybody know, if you have any questions at any time, feel free to use the chat box down here as well. And one of our wonderful ambassadors will answer it. Rebekka has a time set aside at the end of her talk for questions. So if anything pops up in the middle of the talk, please feel free to jot it down in that chat box, and we'll go through all of them at the end, if you like. There's just a couple events in the local area that I'll go through. There is beer yoga that we host every month, super fun, at Your Mate's Brewery. It's at 5:45 on a Monday, the first Monday of the month, October. It's $35 and it includes 2 beers and about an hour of an amazing yoga session. Bookings are definitely essential just due to COVID. Everybody's aware events have limited numbers nowadays. And this is red hot. It's very, very popular. So it does sell out. If you do want a spot, make sure you get in nice and early. There's the cleanup on Double Island Point this time. It's on October 16th to 17th, and it's being run by the Surfrider Foundation here in the Sunshine Coast. It's a biannual cleanup event. Obviously, you will need a four-wheel drive for this one, I believe. But head to Surfrider Foundation Australia or Sunshine Coast Facebook page for more information on that one. And Horizon Festival is still going ahead. It's been a little bit with everything nowadays, events COVID-wise. It's been pushed back a little bit. So it's now running from now until December instead of until September. If you Google Horizon Festival Sunshine Coast, there'll be all the latest information about this rescheduling of events and will they be on the coast as well. We have another cleanup, this time not on a four-wheel drive beach, but down in Caloundra in the South Sunshine Coast. And this looks like it's going to be an awesome day. I just saw this today. I will definitely be there. There's going to be live music. OzMap will be here. There'll be a bunch of environmental stalls. There'll be workshops. There'll be coffee, recycled art. And you do get, if you go and clean the beach, to then do op shopping. And you get to fill up an entire bag, I believe, for free, simply for volunteering your time, which is absolutely amazing. It's taking place at Clark Place Park down in Caloundra, and it's running from 9 AM till 1 PM. So definitely if you're not doing anything on Saturday next month, 16th of October, this one looks like it's going to be heaps of fun. It's run by a group called Visionary Ocean Warriors, who I met a couple of weeks ago. They're an amazing group. Now, in case those weren't enough for cleanups, there is another underwater cleanup on September the 20th, Gold Coast Seaway, this one, and it's at 7:30 a.m. If you are a scuba diver, please feel free to come along and do scuba diving. However, I do believe with most of these events, if you just want to snorkel to clean up, all hands are welcome. So we don't discriminate.
Sorry, Pablo, can I just jump in there? If anyone wants to participate in this one, they need to let me know.
Okay, cool.
So they need to email SEQ surveys at reefcheckeraustralia.org, please, because there's a lot of paperwork to do.
Okay, thanks for letting me know. SEQ surveys at reefcheck.org, was it? I'm sure she'll put it in the chat if anybody's interested in that as well.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat for you.
Thank you. There's a Threatened Species Day event, again in October on Saturday. It's at Kakadu Beach down in Bribie Island. And there are tours running from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. This should be an awesome event as well. If you're down in the Bribie Island region, Bribie Island's a super amazing place. Palmerston Passage there is extremely diverse in our sea life. So head on down. And for next month's Coastal Corals edition, we have seaweed solutions on combating disease in marine life using the immune system. So this is a researcher based at the Sunshine Coast University, Madison Brown. She's currently conducting her honors on seaweed research, in particular in oysters and in fish. And that's October the 12th, next month. If you are interested in volunteering with Reef Check and becoming an amazing human like myself and many others on this call, you don't have to be a scuba diver. You don't even have to be a scientist. We run workshops all year round for both survey diving and for just being an ambassador. Head to reefcheckaustralia.org if you want to find out more info, but I can personally tell you it's super amazing, super fun. You get to do a lot of awesome things. You learn so much about the ocean and about corals in particular. And just in case you haven't, if you wanted to get involved, even on a very passive level, make sure you follow all of our socials. We're most active on Facebook and on Instagram at Reef Check Australia for Facebook and same for IG. We are on Twitter and LinkedIn as well. We post all of our events that are coming up, as well as all relevant info, really. They're all shared on the Facebook page. Now, obviously, this wouldn't be possible as most nonprofit organizations without sponsors. So I just want to give a quick shout out to all the different councils and private organizations involved in making this event possible, such as Sunshine Coast, Clean Water Group, Mask Events, Brisbane Port, Townsville, and Gold Coast. They're the reason things like Coastal Coral even exist. So a big thank you to them. And another big thank you to all of the volunteers who spend hours in their daytime working on things like this to make sure that everything runs smoothly. Reef Check Australia is a non-profit organization and it cannot survive without people volunteering their time and their knowledge to making this a success. You guys all know who you are, so a huge thank you for making it happen. And without further ado, I want to introduce Rebekka. Rebekka is a marine scientist who's working as an environmental training manager and consultant for Nautica in Abu Dhabi in the UAE. Prior to working for Nautica, she completed a bachelor's degree in marine ecology and a Bachelor of Science with first-class honours here in Southeast Queensland while conducting coral health surveys along the coastline as well for Reef Check Australia. Her dissertation focused on benthic habitat mapping of shallow mesophotic reefs in Southeast Queensland. And I won't say any more. I'll let her speak from now on. So welcome, Rebekka.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. I'm very, very excited to be here. Thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for the introductions there, Pablo. I will share my screen and we can get started with my presentation. Can you see this okay on full screen?
It's finished, but yes, we can.
I cannot see my screen. Just
you're at the end.
Click the back. Yeah, you're at the end of the slideshow.
Sorry, apologies for that.
That's all right.
Let's try again. Aha. Is that now at the beginning?
That's
yes.
better. Yep, that's good.
Here we go. Thank you very much. So my name is Rebekka Pentti. I am very excited to be here tonight to talk to you all a little bit about my story and what I'm up to these days. Some of you might know me already. Some of you may not have met me before, but I'm very excited. I wish we could all be in the same room to hold this talk, but this is the world we're living in today. But how amazing is technology that we can still connect from around the world on meetings like these. So today I will talk a little bit about myself and my background. I used to actually work for Reef Check for a couple of years, and I absolutely loved my time there. I'm currently working for a company called Nautica in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. So I will talk a little bit about Nautica and what we do. And then we will get into UAE's local marine environment. So why is the UAE, and especially the Arabian Gulf, so special? We'll talk about our corals here, mangroves, seagrass, just a little bit, and also our local megafauna species. And as I'm going through those critical habitats that we get here in the Arabian Gulf, I will also talk a little bit about a couple of projects that we are currently involved in, including some habitat mapping exercises in the Emirate of Abu Dhabi, some coral relocation efforts as well, and a very exciting course that we've put together called the Arabian Marine Species Observer course. And in the end, we'll have time for questions. So if you have any questions as I'm going through the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat box or keep them to the end, and we'll make sure that we answer all for you. So I actually fell in love with the ocean through scuba diving, like I'm sure a lot of you did as well. I started scuba diving when I was 16, when my family moved to Dubai. I come from Finland originally, and I had a little bit of a culture shock moving to the desert, to be honest. I used to love being in the forest and surrounded by nature. But when I started scuba diving, that's when I felt like I was in my own forest again. And I absolutely loved it. I was diving all the time, every weekend. I went up the ladder with the scuba diving certifications and became a diving instructor. I was actually working for almost 3 years in Dubai as a diving instructor, and I also did one season in Thailand, and I became a professional diver, and that was my introduction to the underwater world. But I felt like it wasn't enough. I wanted to be able to help, because even in those few years that I was working in the diving industry, I could see the decline, especially here in the Arabian Gulf, when it came to the state of our reefs and other dive sites. So then I ended up moving to, before we go there, I was also already getting involved in some research on a volunteer basis. I was involved in the Gulf Elastomer project, which is a study looking into the populations and abundances of sharks and rays. That was my first introduction to collecting scientific data, and really quite devastating what we would see here in the fish markets. Every single day, there are hundreds and hundreds of sharks that are being landed, which is just heartbreaking. And that again was another reason for me to be, wanting to know more and be able to protect our oceans more. So I moved to Australia, and I went to Griffith University to study Bachelor of Marine Science. A lot of you have an idea of what the marine science degree might involve. We learned about the problems and managing problems that affect our oceans, including fisheries and food production, climate change, maritime pollution, waste management. I absolutely loved my degree, and I was, heavily involved in field work and any volunteering projects and things that I could get my hands on during my studies. I also ended up doing an honours degree, and we were looking at benthic habitat mapping of shallow and mesophotic reefs in southeast Queensland, Australia. And that's a whole other story. It was a really, really exciting project. We were also using some Reef Check Australia data and combining those to produce some habitat maps along the coastline there. While I was in Griffith University during my studies, I was also volunteering for the humpback whale research group, Humpbacks and High Rises. I'm sure some of you may have heard of them. They do an incredible job, studying the humpback whales on the east coast of Australia. And that was really my first introduction to collecting data on marine megafauna and marine mammal behavior. And this is something that I'm still doing, as you'll see later on in this presentation. So such incredible creatures, and I really do miss that part of Australia. But most importantly, I was working at, it was a dream come true, really. I was still in university, but I got a job with Reef Check Australia as the SEQ project coordinator. And I think my diving background and the fact that I was the diving instructor at the time with quite a few dives under my belt helped me get that role. I learned so much. I met so many amazing people. I was there for almost 3 years, organizing, leading coral health surveys, cleanup activities. It's amazing to see how many cleanup activities and all the great projects and initiatives that are still going on over there. I was also managing survey data, conducting quality control procedures, creating summary reports, everything that came with the role, and it was incredible. I was in university most weeks and then out in the field most weekends, and got to meet some incredible people. Some of you are here in this presentation. I really do miss you all. I've added a few photos from my time with Reef Check. Some of you might recognize yourselves here. Gold Coast Seaway, a cleanup there in the top left. I hear you have another one coming up. Some training courses on Straddie, Heron Island trips. Then we have Jody at the top left. Julie's also here. Terry. We had this is, I think, one of the cleanups in Caloundra. Just incredible times, and I think Reef Check Australia is doing an amazing job, and Reef Check in general globally. But now I am working in Abu Dhabi in a completely different place. My role is the environmental training manager and environmental consultant for a company called Nautica Environmental Associates. I'm based in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. Nautica has been around for over 20 years, and we do some pretty interesting research and work here protecting our marine environment, but also terrestrial. So some of the things we are involved in include baseline surveys, marine and terrestrial. We do sampling, monitoring studies, photographic, videographic, drone surveys, as you'll see a little bit later. Scientific reporting obviously comes with it all, environmental impact assessments. We do mangrove management plans, stretching environmental management plans, a lot of reporting that comes with the regulatory requirements in this region. We also have a biological lab. We do fauna and plankton analysis, and also some environmental training, which is my passion and what I really, really enjoy and really love doing. So we'll talk a little bit more about our training programs later on in this presentation. But that's Nautica in a nutshell. I will tell you a little bit more shortly. So just to give you an idea of where I am and where everybody is. So this is the Arabian Peninsula. It includes the Red Sea. Hopefully you can see my mouse. Also the Gulf of Aden, also the northwestern part of the Arabian Sea, the Gulf of Oman, and of course the Arabian Gulf or the Persian Gulf, depending on which side you're looking from. But we here refer to as the Arabian Gulf, which is quite a unique water body. And over there somewhere is Abu Dhabi, which is where I am currently living and working. But we do work, Nautica does work in the whole Arabian Peninsula region, but mostly in the Arabian Gulf, which is where we will be, the area that we will be concentrating on in today's presentation. So Arabian Gulf is a hostile marine environment with surprising diversity. It's a semi-enclosed water body located in a very arid setting. We are, very close to the equator. We don't have a lot of trees and lush rainforest, which you have there in the southeast Queensland and Queensland. It's principally a sedimentary basin with mainly biogenic substrate with outcrops of older limestone and a few actively growing reefs. So it's a very, very sandy bottom throughout. And it's a relatively shallow water body with almost all parts of it lie within the photic zone. So it's very, very shallow. The average depth of the Arabian Gulf is around 50 meters. The maximum depth is only 90 meters. So really, it's not very deep. And we'll have a look at a bathymetric map in a moment, so you get an idea of that. And because of this shallow nature, it's an environment with extremes of salinity and temperature. We don't get a whole lot of freshwater input. We don't have many rivers coming into the Arabian Gulf. There's not a lot of rainfall at all throughout the year. We have a lot of a lot of evaporation because it's so hot. It's a very, very hot part of the world. Actually, some of you may have seen recently, we've recorded some of the highest temperatures ever here in Abu Dhabi. And because of all of this, it's very, very saline, and it's got some extremes of temperature. It gets very hot in the summer, up to 36 degrees in the Arabian Gulf. In the summertime, it almost feels like a bath. But also, it's not just very hot, but there's very, very big temperature fluctuation annually. So in the winter, we go down to 17, 18 degrees. So there's a very, very big temperature fluctuation, and it's really quite incredible that animals, especially corals, are thriving here. So we have some really diverse and unique wildlife due to both our geographic location and the isolation from other international waters. There's only a little Strait of Hormuz at the top of the Arabian Gulf, but there's not a lot of water circulation either. It's a very enclosed water body. The water exchange can take up to 5 years. So this creates a whole lot of different problems. So here we have the bathymetric map, and you can see the Arabian Gulf. UAE is down here, Abu Dhabi is around here. This is where I am, and this is the Strait of Hormuz, so that very narrow opening to this water body. I saw we had someone from Qatar joining us. Thank you, welcome. And this is a bathymetric map, so if you have a look at the colors on the left, you can see it's very, very shallow when you move away from the coastline of the UAE. If we want to go diving at a site that is 30 meters deep, for example, you can see 30 is this light green. So you have to travel out sometimes even a couple of 100 kilometers to get that depth. It's an extremely shallow slope. And it's a very interesting thing. When you look on the other side, so UAE also does have an east-facing coastline. It's an emirate called Fujairah. There, if you want to go to 30 meters, you only have to go out 2 minutes on a boat and you're there. There's a very, very steep continental slope that so it slopes and the depth increases very, very quickly. So it's an interesting water body. So the shallow basin of the already warm Arabian Gulf makes it particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, as you can imagine. Pollution is also a major risk. And most of the pollution here originates from ships. Unfortunately, we have an issue with illegal dumping of waste and other materials and oil and things offshore. And it is being regulated, but it is obviously in offshore waters, it can be a little bit tricky to follow up on these issues. And land-generated pollution counts as the second most common source of pollution. I'm sure a lot of you know and have heard of the Palm Islands and the World Island developments in Dubai. So coastal development is a huge thing that is going on here in the UAE. And obviously that creates a whole lot of issues when it comes to natural circulation of water, for example, and obviously pollutants. But the Arabian Gulf has hosted some of the most magnificent marine fauna and flora, some of which are near extirpation, which means local extinction, or they are at a serious environmental risk. Some key fish, for example, key fish species of the Gulf, including the hammer, which you can see there in the bottom, in the middle, that's a hammer or a grouper, orange spotted grouper, and the sherry, they are severely overexploited. And this raises serious concerns over their long-term survival. But we have some amazing conservation actions, which I'll talk about. For example, when it comes to overfishing, there's some new rules and guidelines and laws regulating, catch sizes, and there's limits for the hammer, for example, trying to conserve their populations. Overall, the wildlife of the Arabian Gulf is endangered from both global factors and regional and local negligence. So just to set the scene of what it looks like working out here, this is on a very beautiful day, one of our smaller research vessels. We have, quite shallow areas, as you have heard now, some really low-lying islands, sandy islands with a lot of mangroves as well. We'll talk about mangroves more momentarily. We have a lot of migratory birds, for example, traveling through this area, and a lot of areas of critical importance. So this is a habitat map of the Abu Dhabi Emirate. This is the previous version. This was published in 2014. And as you can see there on the bottom right, Nautica was conducting the ground truthing for this habitat mapping exercise. So it was a combination of high resolution satellite imagery with ground truthing points, hundreds and hundreds of points, both marine and terrestrial, across the Emirate. And actually currently we are involved again in the ground truthing of an update of this map. So it's very, very important. Habitat mapping is so important to identify critical habitats, both on land and in underwater, and the intertidal zones, very importantly as well. So being involved in the habitat mapping exercise is a great honor for us. And obviously we have now quite a good idea of where things are within our emirate here. And some of the most critical habitats that have protection, and that because of the result of this habitat mapping exercise, we now have also quite extensive marine protected areas, MPAs, in Abu Dhabi, which, within MPAs, similarly to Australia, you're not allowed to fish and you're not allowed to anchor. And, there's it's there to protect the underwater areas and species. And the habitats that we in Abu Dhabi that we will now talk about in a little bit more detail are coral reefs, mangroves, and seagrass beds when it comes to the marine environment. So in a nutshell, I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with what corals are, but we may have people from different backgrounds. Coral reefs are tropical ecosystems. They have the second highest biodiversity on Earth after rainforests. They are extremely important habitats for marine life. They provide nursery grounds for juvenile fish. So much they provide that structural complexity for animals to hide in, and the list goes on. Extremely, extremely important. They are solar powered. So some of you may be familiar with the idea of the tiny little plankton, little algae that lives in the tissue of the coral. They are called zooxanthellae, and they are the ones that give the pigment to the coral tissue. And because they are little plants, they use the energy from the sun to live, and they also provide a whole lot of energy for the corals. And I can go on about this, but coral reefs, in a nutshell, are solar powered, so they need sunlight to thrive. They are oldest and largest living structures on the planet. Reefs, as we are painfully aware these days, are under increasing stress globally. So if we talk about corals in the UAE, the Arabian Gulf is ideal for reef building corals, and substantial reefs have formed along the coast of the UAE, particularly here along Abu Dhabi, due to the shallow calcium carbonate rich waters we get here. Coral reefs of the UAE were once extensive, but have unfortunately declined dramatically in recent decades. This decline has been due to major bleaching events from climate change and pressures from coastal development. More than 20 sites in the UAE have already been designated as marine protected areas. So there is increasing understanding of the issues here, and really our government and many, many different organizations are doing an amazing job at trying to protect our reefs locally. And there are plenty of conservation actions in place. These include coral propagation studies. So we're looking into, can we propagate coral in labs, maybe coral translocation efforts, and I'll talk about that in a moment a little bit more. Ongoing monitoring programs and so on. The Environment Agency Abu Dhabi, EAD, they have ongoing monitoring efforts of our reefs, and they are also producing annual reports on this, and also they are the ones who set those MPAs in place, so they're doing a great job. There's a good collaboration also with local universities. We have the New York University, Zayed University, that Nautica, we've also worked together with these organizations and supported them with these projects. The Arabian Gulf is sometimes referred to as a natural lab for coral research, because the conditions that we get here, because it's so hot, we have such high temperatures, it's a really harsh environment for corals to thrive. So some people refer to it's like a mirror of how conditions elsewhere in the world might look in 10 years' time. It's such a harsh condition, harsh environment for corals, but still we have some beautiful diverse reefs. Our reefs have shifted from branching coral dominated to more massive and encrusting, those more robust growth forms. We don't really get too many branching corals, unfortunately, here at all anymore, but still we have these corals that are doing really well, and they are being studied to see what it is that makes them thrive in this environment. Here's just a photo from a recent survey. Unfortunately, this coral is bleached, as some of you might notice. We are unfortunately in the middle of another bleaching event here in the Arabian Gulf as we speak, but hopefully the corals will recover. We are going out to the field again next week after a few weeks off, so it'll be interesting to see how things are looking now at the end of another very hot summer. Here is just this for you guys in Australia might not mean much to see branching coral, but really our reefs used to be dominated by branching coral, and they were all wiped out. More than 90% of all branching coral in the Arabian Gulf has disappeared, and it's very, very rare for us to ever come across branching coral anymore on our dives. But this photo is from one of our survey sites where we're conducting this coral translocation effort and a monitoring study, and we are currently monitoring about a dozen branching coral colonies and seeing how they're doing. And so far so good. I can't go into detail about our clients or any results in too much detail, but we're getting some really nice results from this coral relocation effort. So we had a donor reef and a recipient reef. We weren't the ones who actually relocated the corals, but we are now part of a 3-year biannual monitoring effort of the health of the corals that were relocated. So there was some coral fragmentation involved, where a big colony is broken into smaller pieces, and those frags are then put on another recipient reef, and also some larger colonies were also relocated intact. So we can talk more about that if you have any questions, but so far it's looking really, really good. But as a part of that relocation effort and the monitoring that we are now conducting every 6 months, we are using the Coral Watch Coral Health Chart, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. So it's a simple tool. It's been developed by the University of Queensland. Reef Check also, I know, uses it quite regularly. And basically, you just pick a coral and then record down the lightest and the darkest part of the coral. And this can provide an indication on the health of that coral when it comes to bleaching. But we found that when we were monitoring our little coral fragments and trying to monitor hundreds of corals on a single dive, it would take quite a while for us to have a photo quadrat with the frame and then the Coral Watch chart and then trying to align it with the label and take a photo. So we developed a new frame, which still includes those Coral Watch colors, but it also includes the calibrating scale on the side, and it's hollow in the middle, so you can just put it around whatever coral you're looking at. And then in post-processing of these photos, we can use the scale to calibrate, area calculations, so we can see over time increase or decrease in live coral cover of whatever, fragment or colony we're looking at. But also we can then, from those photos, have a look at the Coral Watch colors, and then all of this data is still being included in the Coral Watch website and in their database as well. So I'm a huge fan of Coral Watch, and this is just something to share with you guys if anybody wants to adopt our methodology and this different shape of the frame. Okay, enough about corals for now. Let's move on to mangrove forests. I'm sure a lot of you know what mangroves are, but some of you might not know. So just very briefly, in a nutshell, mangroves are unique ecosystems generally found along sheltered coasts in the intertidal zone. So they live in two different worlds, both land and sea. Intertidal means where the water comes up and down with the tides. They occur in waterlogged, salty soils of sheltered tropical and subtropical shores. The trees and shrubs are flooded twice daily with rising tides and are able to sustain harsh conditions. And they are really, really important. These forests act as natural coastal guardians. They protect our homes and climate by absorbing high amounts of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, as well as providing us with food and storm buffering. Mangroves are extremely important, and we have a lot of mangroves here in the UAE. Mangrove trees in the UAE are known as firm. I might not pronounce it correctly, unfortunately, and they take up to around 155 square kilometers of the UAE's coastlines. The Avicennia marina, the grey mangrove, is the only mangrove species growing naturally in the UAE and the Gulf in general, and it's also the only species that can thrive in the extreme saline and hot conditions that we experience over here. So replanting or afforestation of a greater quantity of mangroves against numbers lost during construction is the norm put forward as a mitigative strategy in mangrove management plans. So whenever there's a coastal development activity that might impact some mangroves and they may need to take away an area of mangroves, the rule is that you have to replant or create a similar area or double the size of the area. So in fact, the EAD, so the Environment Agency Abu Dhabi, advises that all developers, they have to compensate for any loss of mangroves by planting twice the size of the area or twice the number of mature trees lost that are reclaimed by any development. So mangrove conservation is extremely important here, and we are heavily involved in mangrove management plans for a lot of these coastal development programs here. Obviously, mangrove afforestation is not easy. Sometimes you might need to have a mangrove nursery. Sometimes they will not settle in the new area where you're replanting. It's a tricky one, but definitely enforced here in the UAE, and we do appreciate their importance. And unfortunately, they are being affected by some construction activities, but there are rules and regulations in place for what to do if any mangroves are impacted. Here's just another photo of grey mangroves that we get here in Abu Dhabi. Now, just a very quick example of, how am I doing on time? Pablo, how much time have I got left for this talk?
I just keep talking, Rebekka.
You're good.
Keep talking. All right. I get into too much detail sometimes. Okay, so just a very quick example of a mangrove. So how do we know to quantify those mangroves? So here's an example of a recent area where we conducted a mangrove survey. Unfortunately, this area will be completely removed. All these mangroves will be removed as a hotel development project. But we also use drones to help us quantify the number of mangroves so that we can mitigate against that loss, as I just explained. This is a drone orthomosaic, so it's a map with the stitch photos put together, and it's taken with the drone, much more higher resolution than what you would get from your usual satellite imagery. And this kind of data can provide us with some density, canopy elevation, all sorts of different really useful data. And here is an example of how we quantified. It's all, at the end of the day, it's always going to be an estimation, but here we use some density brackets basically for the different areas of the mangrove within the construction footprint, and we combined that estimation with some in situ ground truthing data on ground. So we also did a 100 square meter transect where we counted every single mature mangrove tree seedling, and then we could extrapolate that data to the wider area to get a number of mangroves that we expect to be lost. Just a quick example. The last critical habitat that I want to very briefly talk about is seagrass. We got lots of seagrass here in the UAE. Seagrass are long grass. They are long grass-like leaves, and they have roots and stems and are closely related to flowering plants. They evolved around 100 million years ago, but today there are approximately 72 different seagrass species, but only 3 in Abu Dhabi. They form dense underwater meadows, some of which are large enough to be seen from space. And they are really diverse and productive ecosystems and can support hundreds of associated species. And they are, again, extremely important because they aid against soil erosion, produce oxygen, they sequester carbon and improve water quality. And they are classified as another critical habitat in Abu Dhabi. So we conduct a lot of seagrass surveys. Here's just an example of a seagrass survey from a construction area. And again, they are mitigated, and construction should not occur on heavily dense seagrass areas. Now, I have a quick question. If people want to open their chat box, and if anybody has an idea of what are we looking at here? This is a seagrass meadow with a couple of trails going across. Any idea what may have caused this? Very good. We have manatee, dugong trails. Perfect. Very good. So these underwater lawnmower, I see. Maybe someone might also say anchor damage. Unfortunately, anchor damage is something that is affecting seagrass beds, but you are absolutely right. These are dugong trails from a survey maybe about a year ago on one of our seagrass meadows. Abu Dhabi actually has the world's second largest population of dugongs after Australia. Australia has the world's largest population, and in Abu Dhabi we have around 3,000 dugongs in the Arabian Gulf, but they are concentrated mostly in Abu Dhabi waters. Here's just a drone photo from a couple of dugongs. They are just incredible animals. Here's another animal that heavily relies on seagrass as a part of their, or the major part of their diet. This is a green turtle. We get lots of green turtles in our Arabian Gulf. And here is a hawksbill turtle. Hawksbill turtles are spongivores more. They eat more sponges and anemones and soft corals, and also some algae here in the Arabian Gulf, but they are a critically endangered turtle, and we get lots of them, and it's actually the only turtle that is nesting on our beaches, on the only species. I'm just getting into some of our marine megafauna species just very quickly. We also get the Indo-Pacific bottlenose dolphin. That's one of our most common dolphin species here. And we get the Indian Ocean humpback dolphin. And Abu Dhabi actually has the world's largest recorded population of humpback dolphins. Now, let's get into our environmental outreach and training activities. I'm getting to the end of my presentation, but environmental outreach and training is my passion. I think it's extremely important. Some of the things we do with our training, we do educational presentations, and we collaborate with local schools. We are also producing some educational materials that they are incorporating in local curriculum. We are doing talks to kids, lots of internships also. We collaborate with some local hotels and do presentations to them, increasing awareness of our local marine environment. Also, we take part in some podcasts, interviews, and TV shows, online events such as this one. We also produce infographic videos, educational posters. We have an extremely talented in-house graphic designer who is helping us with all of that. Also, we do some scuba diving courses. I'm still every now and then teaching diving. We have been teaching the Reef Check Eco Diver course, still some project aware courses. And we also do environmental training for corporate groups and also the general public. So the main course that we are extremely proud of is the Arabian Marine Species Observer, the AMSO course. So just very briefly about this course. The reason why we have put together a course like this is because the presence of trained marine mammal observers on board is a regulatory requirement for many large offshore developments in the Arabian Peninsula region. So whenever there is a development or some offshore oil and gas exploration, anything like that, they have to have a trained observer on board. Our AMSO course is the first regionally specialized marine species observer program in the Arabian Peninsula. And this course is now increasingly recognized as the most suitable option for environmental professionals in the region, and it's specifically developed to take into account regional regulations and marine species. The course is a collaboration between us, Nautica, we are headquartered in the UAE, and another environmental consultancy, 5 Oceans Environmental Services. And it combines over 30 years of experience in the region with leading scientists in the field of marine species identification. We work with some incredible scientists from 5 Oceans, putting together materials. For example, I don't know if you can see this, we've put together a little guidebook and a species ID guide, which is the most up-to-date, it includes the most up-to-date list of marine mammals in the region. Our certification follows the formats of the JNCC MMR course in the UK, as well as the PSO, Protected Species Observer Program, in the Gulf of Mexico. And before our course, people were mainly trained in these 2 courses, but it wouldn't really make sense because they might not be aware of the species we get here in the Arabian Peninsula or the local regulation. Also, we are really excited and proud to have been accredited by the Institute of Marine Engineering, Science and Technology, IMRS, as well as some of our local educational institutions. So it's it was a long approval process, and our course is now approved and recognized quite widely, which is very exciting. So, conclusion to my talk, the shallow basin of the semi-enclosed Arabian Gulf is particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, pollution, coastal development, and overfishing. The Arabian Gulf has hosted some of the most magnificent marine fauna and flora, some of which are near local extinction or at serious environmental risk. But we have plenty of conservation efforts in place. These include, updated habitat mapping efforts to highlight and protect critical habitats. We have large marine protected areas in Abu Dhabi waters. There are many advanced coral reef research programs going on, and there's a good collaboration between research institutes and local government organizations, and so on. There are, mangrove and seagrass management strategies in place. There's a lot of environmental education and community outreach efforts going on. We are really gaining momentum with this environmental outreach, and people really appreciate our local marine environment. There, I want to give a shout out to, we have a few independent citizen science groups and organizations that are focused on marine conservation. So it's really lovely to see that we have a lot of people from different walks of life really getting involved. And also one of the major milestones, in my point of view, is that trained marine species observers are now a regulatory requirement for many large offshore developments. And this is where our AMSO course comes in play. And it feels like we are actually making a little bit of a difference, making sure that, dredgers and other large shipping vessels and stuff are not affecting our critically endangered or endangered marine megafauna in this region. Okay, that is the end of my presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you so much, Rebekka. That was so in-depth. I was struggling to think of questions, but we do have plenty that are coming through our way. So first off, from Kai, where did it go? Have we lost any species of mangrove in the UAE? You said there was only a few, I believe.
Yeah, well, historically, I think the grey mangrove is the primary species. We also get the Rhizophora, which is sometimes referred to, the common name I think is the red mangrove, but very in small quantities. In my knowledge, I think the grey mangrove for a good while has been the only species that has been thriving in this environment. We've had, the issues that I was talking about with the, the temperature and the salinity. That is really the only species that historically has been thriving in this region. So in my knowledge, I don't think we've had a major loss in the recent years of other species.
Okay, and what about seagrass?
Seagrass also, we have 3 species. We get the ovalis, H. ovalis, uninervis, and stipulacea, for those of you that might be aware of mangrove of seagrass species. We seem to be dominated by the uninervis, in my opinion, wherever we see seagrass beds here, but definitely there is a decline with seagrass meadows as a result of sedimentation. Sedimentation is another issue that I didn't talk about much at all, but there's a lot of dredging and coastal development happening, and sedimentation is reducing the visibility in the Arabian Gulf. And again, seagrass being a plant, they need sunlight to be able to thrive. So whenever you have a lot of turbidity in the water and a lot of sedimentation and loss of sunlight, that is heavily affecting our seagrass beds. When it comes to species of seagrass, I'm not 100% sure about that one, to be honest. But as far as I'm aware, in the recent years, those are the 3 species that are here.
Okay, I never even thought about sedimentation as being a climate challenge. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's a big challenge over here.
Next one from Julie. Do you know why there was a loss of branching coral there now?
So branching coral globally also, they are, very fast growing. So, but that also means that they are quite fragile. So they're very, heavily impacted and not, they don't do very well with bleaching. So bleaching is the major reason why we've lost the vast majority of our branching coral over here. Bleaching, there's many reasons for bleaching, but the major reasons for the bleaching events in the Arabian Gulf are those extended peaks of high temperature. So that corals cannot tolerate that, and when they get stressed, they expel the zooxanthellae in the tissue. And some corals, some of those more robust growth forms like your massive corals and encrusting growth forms, they are more resilient. We get a lot of varieties and those more massive growth forms that are really quite resilient to bleaching in this region. So they have been doing a lot more better than the branching corals. And the major reason for the reduction in the branching corals is unfortunately climate change and coral bleaching.
Yeah. From Terry now, what's the tidal range in the Gulf?
Tidal range, it's not very extensive, compared to like the UK, for example, where you get, meters and meters. In general, I think an average tidal range is probably around less than a meter, around a meter. Depends, obviously, time of the month. That we do sometimes get spring tides and a little bit bigger, but the tides don't affect our operations here as much as they do in Australia, for example. Definitely, I remember working for Reef Check, we were always checking tides a lot more to make sure that we are, timing things with the current. But having said that, we do get quite a lot of currents depending on, we have a lot of channels, especially in Abu Dhabi, and some of our operations are in those channels. So obviously, in an area like that, we have to take currents into account a lot more. But it's not a very large, I can't give you a number, unfortunately, but it's not a very large tidal range.
That's all right. We do have a huge tidal range up here, especially north. From Bruno now, could you describe the types of sharks you find in the UAE, and do they differ depending on what side you're on? Is this photo here local?
This photo is not local. This is from the Maldives. Jody, I don't know if she's still with us, but this was on a trip we did outside of work. But we do get whale sharks in the Arabian Gulf. And actually, we've had a little bit of an issue recently with whale sharks. So this is a whale shark, by the way, for those of you who might not know, whale sharks are the largest fish in the ocean. And we do get whale sharks. We have a whale shark aggregation off the coast of Qatar. And quite a lot of whale sharks. You don't very regularly see them, but sometimes they do get lost in some of our artificial channels. Last year, we had 2 whale sharks that were, I think, almost 2 months. They were stuck in one of these artificial channels, and we had a major rescue operation with the Environment Agency with jet skis and floats, and they had to be guided many, many kilometers out through the artificial challenge back out to sea. So yes, whale sharks we get, but they're not very, very common. We do get, lots of reef sharks. We get some bamboo sharks. We get the Arabian bamboo shark, which is I think an endangered species, and it's got a very limited global distribution, and we get those on our reefs here, which is quite exciting. But sharks are not very regularly, we don't come across sharks very regularly, but probably the ones that we come across through our work in the shallow areas and seagrass beds and coral reefs are the bamboo sharks, the Arabian bamboo sharks. But in the offshore waters, we get a range. We can get bull sharks and some of the bigger predatory sharks. But and having worked at the start of my career with the shark research, there's a lot of species, and it's very sad. Sad to say that vast majority of the species abundance and the different species we get here, I've seen dead in the fish markets.
It's unfortunate, but it's something you see too often nowadays. On a lighter note, are there any nudibranchs there?
Of course, we have nudibranchs. Yes, we do. I'm not a nudibranch expert, as I know we have a couple, Julie and Terry, with us today, but we definitely get nudibranchs. I think not to the extent that in Australia, for example, you're recording, but yes, we definitely come across them. Seems to be the same few species that we most often see, but definitely they are around. Lots of flatworms as well.
Okay, nice. A question from Junid again. How are the recommendations followed that you provide?
Mm-hmm. That's a tricky question, and obviously it depends very much on what project it is, which client it is, who we're talking about, what recommendation it is. In general, they are being followed and they are being enforced. It's a tricky one to answer, honestly, because definitely, I would love to say that everybody follows all the recommendations, but sadly, we do often come across, projects where they may be asking for a mangrove management plan after all the mangroves have already been completely destroyed. But I can't go into much detail about these issues, unfortunately.
Fair enough. Do you have problems with destructive fishing techniques, such as cyanide and explosives over there?
I don't think explosive and cyanide are a big issue here, luckily. However, fishing and overfishing is definitely something that is an issue. But in the recent years, they've had some pretty great developments when it comes to regulating those fishing techniques. We have a fish trap called the gargour, which is just kind of like it's just a fish trap, like a half moon, half circle, which is really quite destructive because it's not selective at all. And there was a lot of bycatch, and it was a very, very commonly used local fishing technique. But those have been now completely banned, I believe, by the Environment Agency. Also, fishing nets have been a major issue, and we've had a lot of entanglements with dugongs, for example, drowning in fishing nets. But those things seem to be regulated a little bit better over the recent years. And luckily, I don't think like those destructive fishing techniques like cyanide and explosives are used to an extent that they are in the Southeast Asia, for example, sometimes.
Wonderful. And I have one last question for you. And while I do that, I have questions for the audience as well. So I'm just going to launch a poll and feel free to answer. If you guys are based internationally, let us know in the comments. But in regards to your artificial reefs, what's the diversity like in your propagation? Are you only reproducing one species of the branching coral, or do you try and make it as diverse as possible? And are they heat resistant, or are they heat resistant species?
Yes, good question. Actually, with the propagation, I maybe have misled you with my words. I apologize for that. First of all, Nautica, we don't do the coral propagation ourselves, but we are heavily involved with Zayed University is one of the universities who have had these really exciting propagation projects, and we've been there in the field with them also and in the lab helping out. But I'm not an expert on answering this question. But actually, a lot of the species that they're using are not branching, but they are those massive growth forms, mainly Cyphastrea and Platytara. and those are the two most commonly used. So it's not a high diversity of different species, to answer your question simply, for that particular project. But there are also a few other ones going on in the region. I know New York University are doing a lot of very, very interesting and exciting research in the Gulf and publishing a whole lot of papers. So there's a lot going on over here.
Okay. Is there a reason they only use 2 species, or is it just because it's easy?
I think they're the most readily available. So a lot of these species that they've done fragmentation. So we've been involved in collecting some colonies from the wild, from the reefs, and the most readily available ones are Porites, Platygyra, and Sophostrea. Porites is a broadcast feeder spawner, so it doesn't really work as well in the lab because they collect the larvae in the lab and then it settles on little plates. But they're also looking into fragmentation, so bringing in full coral colonies and then fragmenting those into smaller pieces and then putting those back out. And I think the answer for why only 2 species and why those ones is that they are the most readily available, and they seem to do quite well, even with the relocation between the natural reefs and the lab and back and forth. We've been involved in that project for a good couple of years, but again, I'm not the expert leading that project. So Zayed University and Dr. Hendrik Stahl would be able to answer their questions in much more detail for you.
That was plenty of detail. And one last thing, I do sometimes forget, if you guys all want to take a quick photo for social media as well, if you want to stop sharing, Rebekka, and everybody turn their cameras on, it would be amazing to stop seeing so many black screens and see some beautiful smiles. I know it's a weird world we live in where this excites me, seeing people over a camera, but that's life now. There are humans watching. Amazing.
I see my mom and my sister. Family representing.
Yeah, I was gonna say I saw a Finnish name.
Yeah.
Cool. I wish I could be up in
embarrassing
Lapland.
me.
They're just proud of you, I'm sure.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
All right.
Hi, Dave.
Wait a little bit longer just in case anyone else wants to turn their screen on. Cool. That you do. All right, in 3, we'll give a big smile. 3, 2, 1, cheese. Oh, I need a click print screen actually, sorry.
Still like that, just tail.
Awesome. Let me see if I got it, because wonderful. Such lovely smiles. Well, thank you all very much for joining. Thank you first and foremost to Rebekka for hosting. It was super informative.
Thank you very much for having me.
Heaps about the UAE, to be honest.
Thank you.